Everybody, this is Pastor Tim Madison from Bainbridge First Baptist Church with a message for you from God's Word this evening. You know, one of the things that makes human beings unique is our awareness of time. You know, some people would prefer to live in the past. Some people constantly dream of the future, but we all have to deal with the present, the right now. I'd like you to understand this evening where you might fit on God's timetable. From a passage you'll find in the Old Testament, the book of Haggai, chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. In the second year of Darius the king, in the 6th month, and the first day of the month, came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet unto Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Josedech, the high priest, saying, Thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, This people say the time is not come, the time that the Lord's house shall be built. And then came the word of the Lord by Haggai the prophet, saying, Is it time for you, O ye, to dwell in your sealed houses, and this house lie waste? The date was August 29th, 520 BC. The prophet Haggai had a very short ministry. There are only 4 sermons recorded in the Bible. He may have been quite old when his ministry began. It's one possibility. But it's interesting that each of these messages is dated, and that's why we know the day when this message was given. The circumstance was this. In 586 BC, Nebuchadnezzar invaded and overthrew Jerusalem. The city was razed to the ground, and the temple was completely destroyed. God's people were taken into Babylon as captives, and there they remained for 70 years. This exile was God's judgment on people for their sins, and it was a time of great sorrow for God's people, times when they felt cut off from God and they could no longer worship Him as they once had done. And then in 536 BC, Zerubbabel and Joshua the high priest had led the exiles back to Jerusalem, and work on rebuilding the temple started. The debris was cleared away that the Babylonians had left behind. The foundation was laid, at least enough so that they could offer sacrifices on the altar in the open air. And then the work stopped because they had to work on their own houses, and they had jobs they had to go to, and farms to take care of. And people were saying, this is not a good time to rebuild the Lord's house. And the problem was, 15 years later, people were still saying, man, it's not a good time to build the Lord's house. And that's why God says, is it time for you to work on your own houses, to dwell in your sealed houses? That's a house with wooden paneling that'd be placed over the adobe or the stone that was there. But the work of God lagged behind, and it stopped because they were all wrapped up in their own affairs and their own lives. People put God's work second and their own needs first. God's house was in ruin, but their houses were doing just fine. God's house was neglected, but their house was erected. God's house was not remembered, but their house could not be forgotten. God's house, second class in their priorities, but their own houses were first. God's house got the leftovers, and their houses were running over. You get the picture? They had plenty of time for other things, but none for God. And so many people have that attitude as they consider their own time, that maybe the weather is too bad to attend church or go visiting. But it's not too bad for a hunting trip or a shopping spree. It's amazing. People will sit through a doubleheader baseball game and never complain, and yet they start to fidget if the church service runs 5 minutes overtime. As we look forward to the end of 2020 and the beginning of a new year, I want to ask you, consider how you use your time and consider where God fits into that picture. Give God the time next year. Thanks, everybody. Have a good evening, and I'll be back with you again very soon.